Welcome to Hot Topics After Dark with your free DeShawn, strategic advisor, coach, and author. Let's get talking.
Hello, fams, faves, likes, and loves, and those souls I have yet to meet. This is Jeffrey DeShawn, the Inspired Muse, with this special return episode of Hot Topics After Dark, dedicated to the living legacy of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. Now, for me, upon hearing the news of the passing of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, I had a very emotional reaction of a deep feeling of loss. It was like that feeling of loss that sort of hits you at the top of your stomach and the base of your lungs, that causes sort of queasiness, uncertainty just internally, that just sort of vibrates across, your core. And it reminded me of the feeling I had upon learning of the passing of Maya Angelou. Now, these three individuals are people that I've never met personally. But nonetheless, upon their passing, I felt a deep loss, as if I were personally losing access to a required resource for my life. As if I had a personal tie, connection, or expectation to their living. And that was strange with me because it was very present with me. I felt it. I could sense it. As I reflected on this feeling, this new feeling of loss for people that I didn't know, I was reminded of the first law of thermodynamics. For science was my first love, and as all things that you become excited about, there are elements of it that just stick with you, that you just become really consumed with. And the first law of thermodynamics is one of them, which states that energy is neither created nor destroyed, but transformed from one form to another. And it is in this knowing that, and re-knowing that, my feeling of this deep collective loss over these two just angels among men began to reveal gratitude and possibility. Gratitude for the life that they lived, and gratitude for the possibility that life and living has brought us. Because my soul had begun to recognize that while these two giants among men are no longer with us in the physical, that which they inspired, created, and stood watch for is still with us. That which they inspired, created, and stood watch for is still with us. For just as their life energy is still with us in mind, soul, and spirit, which I'm sure we will hear from those that will reflect on their life and legacy and eulogize them, so is their power to stand in the gap and point a light to our future possibility. And in some ways, minus the boundaries of the physical form, they may have more reach to point us to the light. For just as they stood in the gap among the living, I have no doubt that they will take their posts in the beyond. I feel I know this because they, both John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, had survived their lived experience of racism and oppression, having lived through it and beyond it, living through it and beyond it to not only continue to stand in the gap for others and the others yet to arrive. They had lived beyond their lived experience, direct experience of racism and oppression, but continued to stand in the gap for those to come. For they could foresee the long road ahead to the manifestation of the beloved community, yet they continue to stand in the gap. And now that their hour has come to be relieved of their physical watch, it made me think of the Donnie McClurkin song, Stand, one of my mother's favorites. The main message of the song is when you have done all you can, when you know you have done all you can, you just stand. John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, along with so many others that walked with them and before them, accepted their call to stand watch. They accepted their call. John Lewis and C.T. Vivian accepted their call to stand watch, not limiting who they were willing to watch over based upon sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, immigration status, skin color, economic status, and so on and so on. They didn't limit their territory or who they stood watch over. And as I think about them having stood watch and stood their watch for so long, after having endured so much, I myself began to, again in life, hear the echoes of the call to stand. For at this transition hour, not just the transition hour of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian's and others, that so many that are transitioning in this moment, but this transition hour of our existence on earth, I cannot help to think that it is time for those of us who are now being called to take up a watch, to begin to reflect on the life lessons from the living legacy of John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, and those others that walk with them and before them, and begin to ask ourselves, how are we leveraging our experiences, our talents, our gifts to stand in the gap for the future and to help build and create the infrastructure required to manifest a life of liberation and freedom for our children? John Lewis was a freedom fighter and a living monument to the fight to end racism and social and economic injustice. He carried that flame with him into every space and every place, into every title, role, and opportunity, because his foundation as a freedom fighter is what he stood upon. And is what he stood upon unabashedly, unapologetically, and with fervor, as for and on behalf of Black people and all oppressed people. For C.T. Vivian, also, among many things, was a strategist and organizer, and as they say, an organizer of organizers. And he too carried that into every space and every place he was called to advise, to share, and to influence. And now that they are no longer with us in the physical, I find myself asking myself, and I find myself wanting to ask others and dialogue and engage with others, what are we standing upon? What is it that has laid the foundation in our lives and experience that frames our lens of the fight for liberation and freedom? What is it about our lived experience that has given us a framework for our fight for liberation and freedom that is to come? What are we standing in the gap for? What is our vision of liberation and freedom for the future? What are we carrying with us into the spaces, places, systems, and institutions that we've been called to dismantle, build, and restore? I believe John Lewis and C.T. Vivian had a well-developed understanding of where their lived experience had brought them and where their lived experience had brought them through and to. And as they stood in the gap, I believe they did so with a formulated vision of what liberation and freedom could and would mean, not just or not even for themselves, but for the future. If we are to truly honor their living legacy, as I know the call has come and the call will continue to come, we must examine within ourselves and as a collective, what are we standing in the gap to manifest for our future? And what are we carrying with us into those spaces, places, and systems and institutions that we seek to dismantle, create, and build? For like John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, we must look past our present into the eyes of our future. And we must do so from a place of clarity and authenticity. And as we, those who are hearing and will receive the call to take up a watch, as we take our watch, let us learn from our past as we build the infrastructure and foster culture needed to manifest our new tomorrow. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, but transformed from one form to another. May your light and love manifest in ways yet to be imagined. And may your liberating warrior spirit ignite a flame of revolution across the great beyond. Fly in power, John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. For your physical watch has ended, but no doubt your work continues as you begin to take up your rest. This is Jeffrey DeShawn, the Inspired Muse. All things are possible and nothing is out of reach. I'll see you next time.